So today we have a one-day, I don't know what to call it, workshop or seminar or course. We'll go from 10 to 4. And I thought that this morning we can go from about 10 to 11 or so, have a break, 10-minute break, and then go until about 12:15, 12:30, then have a lunch break for an hour and a half, then start again about 2 and go until 4 with a break in there. So roughly like that. We'll see how things go. Sometimes there's questions and discussion and things go a little bit late. And so this course or seminar is part of a class that's been going on for a few months now on Thursday nights, which we call Exploring Buddhist Philosophy. And so far we had a few different modules. The first one was about the Four Noble Truths, and the second was about the Two Truths. Then the last one we did was about the mind, just looking at the nature of the mind and some of the types of mind that we experience. So today we're starting the fourth module in this course, which is called The Path to Enlightenment. And we'll be using a text, traditional Tibetan text, as the basis for this class. So before we get into that, let's do some prayers and then some meditation. So far I haven't given any much explanation about the prayers that we are doing, because I thought maybe most people were familiar with them, but just in case some people are not familiar with the prayers. The first prayer is called the Prayer of Refuge and Bodhicitta. And so refuge is this attitude that we have with regard to the Buddha, his teachings, his followers. We call these, in Buddhism, we call these the three jewels of refuge: Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So this is a tradition in all Buddhist countries, Buddhist cultures, that people take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that's said to be actually what is the criterion for being a Buddhist. What makes you a Buddhist is if you take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And ideally, this is something you do with an understanding of why you take refuge and who you're taking refuge in, and so forth. So it's usually something you need to study for a while. You need to learn about Buddhism, and then learning about the Buddha's teachings and thinking about them and checking to see, is this right for me? Is this something that I want to do? Then at some point in time, one may make the decision, the commitment to wanting to follow the Buddhist path. So taking refuge is actually something for Buddhists, people who are already Buddhist, who already have made that commitment to following the Buddhist path. So if that isn't the case with you, if you haven't really been studying very much and not sure if this is the path that you want to follow, then it may not be appropriate for you to recite this prayer. So it's completely up to you. It's optional if you want to recite it or not. So the first two lines are related to that, expressing refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and it says the Supreme Assembly, but that refers to the Sangha, the followers of the Buddha. And then the second two lines of the prayer express bodhicitta, which is literally, it means the mind of enlightenment. So it's the altruistic attitude or intention that is based on feeling love and compassion for others and wanting to help others, wanting to help the world. And then again, making a kind of commitment that you will work on yourself, develop your potential for enlightenment, and eventually become a Buddha, an enlightened being, so that you can help all living beings. So again, that to get to that point where you feel that way usually takes time. You need to study and think about, contemplate the teachings, and then at some point decide that that's something you want to do. So again, that may not be appropriate for you. You may not feel ready to make that kind of commitment or make that kind of expression of wanting to become a Buddha. So that's why I usually say you don't have to recite these prayers. They're really for people who've already been studying for a while and have a good understanding of the basic Buddhist teachings, and then feel that this is what they would like to do in their life. But the second prayer, I think, is pretty universal. I don't think it's only for Buddhists, because this prayer is expressing 4 very positive and beneficial states of mind or thoughts. The first one is loving kindness, love, wishing sentient beings, living beings, to be happy, to have happiness and the causes of happiness. So that's something, that kind of thought or attitude is something found in all religions and spiritual traditions, and even people who are not religious, not following any particular religion could relate to that idea of wishing happiness for others. And then the second line expresses compassion, wishing sentient beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And that's, again, something that I think many people could relate to, whether they're Buddhist or not, whether they're religious or not. And then the third line is expressing what we call joy, immeasurable joy. And this is wishing sentient beings to not be separated from happiness that's free from suffering. So this is wishing sentient beings to have really pure happiness, pure, long-lasting happiness. And this specifically refers to happiness of higher states of mind, such as liberation and enlightenment, where one is free of suffering and has only happiness and peace. So wishing sentient beings to achieve those states. The fourth is called equanimity. Equanimity is a state of mind that isn't affected by attachment, really strong clinging and grasping to some people, some objects, nor aversion, hatred, anger, rejecting some people and, not wanting to help them or be kind to them in any way. So the ideal in the Buddhist path is to have equanimity, where your mind is balanced and even towards everybody. You don't reject anybody. You don't have favorites, but you care equally for everyone, for all living beings. Similar to, a good example of this would be a doctor. I mean, a doctor takes an oath that they will help all their patients. Anybody who's sick, anybody who needs medical treatment, they actually have a vow or a commitment to help. So they can't sort of play favorites and say, well, I'll help that person, but not that person. I don't like him. So that kind of attitude ideally is something we adopt in the spiritual path. So when we generate the wish to help others, ideally it should be like that. It should be willing to help everybody and anybody without choosing some and rejecting others. And so here we wish all sentient beings to also develop that kind of attitude. And then the third prayer is called the 7-limb prayer. And this is a condensation of 7 different practices, each of which is a whole practice in itself. And these practices are basically, they're part of the path, especially the path to enlightenment. Because in order to become enlightened, we all have the potential to become enlightened, but in order to actually become enlightened, to develop that potential in ourselves, there are various things we need to do. We need to study, learn, meditate, and so forth. But it said we also need to clear away negative energy that might be there from the past. Like if we had bad habits in the past, hurtful things that we did, or attitudes that we held, that we were sort of addicted to, that were not very helpful, like anger and hatred. So So in our mind, there's usually some residue of past unskillful behavior and attitudes, and that's kind of negative energy, and it can be an obstacle to the development of our potential, our positive potential for enlightenment. So there are practices for purifying or clearing away that kind of negative energy. So some of these practices are for that purpose. And another aspect of the path is to cultivate or build up or accumulate positive energy, which I think of as fuel, like fuel that you put in your car to make it go. You may have a car, really nice, new, brand new car, and it can take you places, but without fuel, you won't be able to go anywhere. So you need fuel to be able to move and go places. So I think of positive energy as like that. It's like fuel that enables us to actually move along the path, in the sense of our mind being able to change and transform and get insights and develop positive qualities and so forth. So there are certain practices for cultivating positive energy, building up positive energy. And so this prayer, I won't go into all the details of it, but there's like 7 different practices in there, and they're for the purpose of doing those 2 things: purifying or clearing away negative energy, building up positive energy, to help us be able to actually get somewhere in our practice. And then the last prayer is a prayer and mantra of the Buddha. And so this is, part of it is in Tibetan. The first part is in Tibetan. And it's just reciting praise of the Buddha for his various qualities. I can give you a few hints about what's said in there, because it's in Tibetan. And if you don't know Tibetan, it doesn't make much sense. So Lama is the Tibetan word for teacher, spiritual teacher or guru. And then Tunba is the term for, it means founder. So it means the Buddha is like the founder, the originator, the first teacher of this particular tradition, Buddhism. And then Chomdende is the Tibetan term for arhat. That means a person whose mind is totally free of all the disturbing thoughts and emotions like anger, attachment, and so forth. So all those disturbing thoughts and emotions have been totally eliminated from the mind, and the person no longer has any suffering. So their mind is totally pure. And then Deshin Shekpa means Tathagata. It's the Tibetan term for Tathagata. Tathagata is another term for Buddha. It means one who has gone thus. It's just another term that means somebody who has gone to enlightenment, who has gone totally beyond suffering, totally beyond samsara, to the highest state that's possible. And then Drachomba, that's the term for arhat, Drachomba. Chomdende, what is Chomdende? Chomdende means foe destroyer, which is actually another term for someone who has eliminated all the disturbing thoughts and emotions. And then Drachomba is arhat. So that's a person who's attained nirvana or liberation. And then Yang Takbar means perfectly or completely, totally. Yang Takbar Dzogbe. Dzogbe means thoroughly. And then Sangye. Sangye is the term for Buddha. It's also my name, part of my name. And it means one who has totally purified their mind and developed all the positive qualities fully. Okay, so it's just saying that the Buddha has achieved that state totally and perfectly and completely. And then Pelgyawa means glorious and victorious. And Shakya. Shakya is the name of the Buddha's, when he was born into this family or clan called Shakya. So it's his sort of family name. And then Tupa. Tupa means powerful one who is powerful. So he's a sort of powerful one from the Shakya clan. And then the last line, Chagtsel, means prostrate. I prostrate, I bow. Chudo, I make offerings. Kyapsuchi means I take refuge. So it's sort of expressing qualities of the Buddha and then saying, I prostrate to you, I make offerings to you, I take refuge in you. And then there's the mantra of the Buddha, Om Muni Muni Ma Muni Soha. So it said it's very good to recite mantras because it's a way of connecting our mind with enlightened mind and bringing into our mind some of the positive qualities, some of the positive energy of enlightened beings. So that's just a brief explanation of the prayers in case some of you haven't heard that before. If you have questions, we can look at those later, but let's just do the prayers now. Those who wish to, again, it's totally optional. It's not required, but if you wish to, you can. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So in the next prayer, we'll just pause for a short time after each of the 4 lines to give our mind a bit of time to contemplate the meaning of the words and see if we can generate those particular attitudes in our mind. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that hold some close and others distant. Then, 7 limb prayer. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So this prayer, the first part we'll do 1 time, and then the mantra we'll do about 7 times. Lama tamba chomden de deshin shekpa da chomba yang takpa dzogpe sangye pa yawa shakya tupala Chat Salo Chuto Kyapsu Chi Wo Om Muni Muni Maha Muni So Om Muni Muni Maha Muni So Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha. 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 Okay, now let's do a bit of meditation. So start by sitting in a comfortable position, one that you will be able to sit still in as long as possible without having to move, although it's not wrong to move during meditation, but each time we move, it makes our mind a bit more disturbed and agitated. So being able to sit still can help our mind be more still and quiet. That's why it's good to find a comfortable position that you won't have to move too much. But it's still good to try to sit with a straight back. That helps the mind to be more clear and focused. And just take a quick look at your body, internally, I mean, and see if you notice if there's tension anywhere in your body, your shoulders, neck, back, your chest or abdomen. And if you do find any tension, see if you can let it go. You could try to imagine that it melts and flows away, flows down and sinks into the earth beneath us. Another helpful way of releasing tension is to breathe deeply. So you breathe in slowly and deeply, and then breathe out slowly. Let the breath go out slowly. And you can imagine releasing any tension with the breath. It goes out with the breath when you breathe out. So try that for 2 or 3 breaths, and then go back to normal breathing. So now just continue to breathe in a normal, natural rhythm. Just letting your breath flow in and out, letting your body breathe as it normally does. And just try to stay focused on the breath. In other words, just observe or be aware of the breath coming in and going out. Being aware of the breath really means paying attention to the sensations in the body as we are breathing in and out. That means we're just staying right here with our body in this place and right now in the present time, not the past or the future. So that's the only thing that's really real right now is the present, what's happening in the present moment. The past is over, it's gone, it's not there anymore. The future is not yet there, not yet here. So we have thoughts. Thoughts appear in our mind, thoughts of the past, memories of the past, which can also mean what you did this morning before coming here, or any other time in the past. We also have thoughts of the future. We have plans, things we would like to do, or things that we have to do later, today or tomorrow or sometime in the future. These are just thoughts in our mind. The actual past and future aren't really existing right now. So sometimes it is useful to think about the past, think about the future. But right now, just give yourself a break from that. Give yourself permission to just be in the present moment, to just be right here, right now, with your body, with your breath coming in, going out. This is actually a great remedy for stress. Because thinking about the past, thinking about the future can make us stressed. So just staying in the present moment can help us to be more relaxed and peaceful and not stressed. Just try to stay with the breath, and if there are thoughts come up in your mind of the past or the future, then just let them go. Put them aside. You can always deal with them later if you need to, but just don't deal with them right now. So now, before opening your eyes and coming out of the meditation, just take a few more moments to see if you can generate a positive motivation or intention about being here today. So what we are doing here today is looking at the Buddha's teachings, specifically about the path to enlightenment, how to develop our potential for enlightenment so that we can be more and more beneficial for others, for the world. So if it's comfortable for you, if it feels appropriate, see if you can generate the altruistic intention of wanting to become a Buddha, to become fully enlightened, so that you can help all living beings. And think of that as your reason, your motivation for being here today. But if it's not comfortable to think in that way, if you're not yet sure if there's such a thing as enlightenment, or if you're not sure if you are able to attain enlightenment or you want to attain enlightenment, then you might be able to generate some other kind of altruistic intention, such as, I would like to learn things here today that will help me to be more kind and helpful to others and less likely to harm others, cause suffering to others. So may this be helpful for me and for others. So you could think of something like that as your reason or your motivation for being here today. Okay, and then when you feel ready, you can come out of the meditation and open your eyes, relax. Okay, so as I mentioned, in this module, we're going to be studying, going through a text, which is called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path. And this is a text it's a very short text. It only has like 14 verses. And it was written by a Tibetan Lama, Tsongkhapa, who's the founder of the Gelug tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. This is the tradition that we follow here. It's the same tradition as the Dalai Lama. And he lived in 15th century, 14th, 15th century. And so I uploaded the root text, the three principal aspects of the path. It was on the website. I also made a few copies if anybody would like for today. Maria wants one, I think. You want one? No, he has. And then there's this book, which is called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path. And it's a commentary on this text given by Tibetan Lama, Geshe Sonam Rinchen, who he's one of my teachers. He passed away last year, so we have to talk about him in the past, but he was a wonderful teacher, and he was teaching at the Tibetan library in Dharamsala for many years. I don't know how many years, maybe 20, 30 years, a long time. Really wonderful Lama. And so he gave this, he gave a teaching, a commentary on this little text of Lama Tsongkhapa's. So I thought we could use this as the basis. If you want to have the book, you can buy it. If not, it's not really necessary. I'll be covering the main points of the book. And it's said that, like, if you want to, if you're a teacher and you want to teach a text, then you should receive what they call lung, or transmission of the text. And what that means is that a lama will read the text, and you just sit there and listen. You kind of get imprints of the sound of the text in your mind. So I have received that from the Dalai Lama several times, received transmission. I haven't really studied the text before, but at least I've received the transmission of it. So that means, officially I'm qualified to teach it. But I prefer to think of this course as like we're studying it together. We're learning about it and looking at it together. And so first, I'd like to give a little explanation of what is Lam Rim, in case some of you are not familiar with it. So this text, the three principal aspects of the path, belongs to a category or a genre of texts which are called the Lam Rim. Lam is the Tibetan word for path, and Rim has the meaning of like stages. Yeah, so we translate the Lam Rim as stages of the path. And specifically, the path here is the path that leads to enlightenment or Buddhahood. So it's the stages of the path to enlightenment, the steps that we have to follow if we wish to reach enlightenment. So essentially, Lam Rim, the Lam Rim is a way of explaining the main points of the Buddha's teachings in a step-by-step way, telling us what we need to do to get from where we are now, if we are unenlightened beings, we're not enlightened beings. So to get from here up to the state of enlightenment. So what are the steps we have to follow in order to achieve that? And so the Lam Rim mainly developed, this Lam Rim tradition, or this way of explaining the path to enlightenment, developed in Tibet. But it was based on the Buddhist teachings. So the Lam Rim can trace its origins to the sutras of the Buddha. In particular, a type of sutra given by the Buddha called the Prajnaparamita, or Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So there's a collection of these sutras that explain the Bodhisattva's path, basically, how to follow the Bodhisattva's path and become enlightened. And you might be familiar with these because there's the Heart Sutra. If you've read or heard of the Heart Sutra, that's one of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Also the Diamond Sutra, sometimes it's called the Diamond Sutra, the Vajrakata Sutra, is another of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So there's a number of different Perfection of Wisdom Sutras given by the Buddha that explain how to follow the path to enlightenment. So that's the original source of the Lam Rim. And then after the Buddha passed away and his teachings were transmitted in India for many generations, eventually there developed two lineages of explanation of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, because it is said that within these sutras, some of them are really long. Like, for example, on the altar, you can't really see it right now, but there's a copy of the longest, it's 100,000 verses of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. It's like this big. It's really, really long. So some of these sutras are quite long and contain a lot of information, of course. And it is said that there's sort of two subjects or two topics that are dealt with in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. The one that is most obvious, most manifest, is wisdom. So they explain how to develop wisdom, how to develop particularly the wisdom of emptiness. So they talk about emptiness. So that's the main topic when you're reading the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. But then there's said to be another topic, which is not so obvious, but it's more hidden, implicit. And that is the actual stages that you have to follow to develop your potential for enlightenment, you know. So that side of the path as well. Sometimes it's called the method side of the path. So because there are these two subject matters or topics of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, there arose these two lineages of explanations of them. So one lineage, the one that dealt with wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness, went through Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and so on, the various masters that kind of mainly focused on the teachings on emptiness. And then another lineage mainly focused on teaching this more implicit subject matter of the actual stages of the path, how to develop love and compassion and follow the Bodhisattva's path, practice the 6 perfections and so forth. And so that lineage went through various teachers such as Maitreya and Asanga and so forth. So there's these Indian masters that were part of these two traditions, two lineages. And then eventually a master, an Indian master by the name of Atisha, who lived in the 10th century, 11th century, he received both of these lineages. So he held both of them. And then the later part of his life, he was a great master. And then in the later part of his life, he was invited to Tibet. And at that time, Buddhism was already in Tibet, but they'd run into problems. Some mistaken ideas and mistaken ways of teaching and practicing and so forth. So the king of Tibet was concerned about this situation, and he wanted a great Indian master to come in and kind of straighten things out. So Atisha was invited. So he came to Tibet and spent the remaining years of his life in Tibet teaching and kind of cleaning up the situation of Buddhism in Tibet. And while he was in Tibet, he wrote this text, which is called A Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And this is actually the first Lamrim text. And so what he did was he took, because he was a great scholar, he knew all the teachings of Buddhism. So he took the most essential points of Buddha's teachings and put them in a kind of step-by-step manner, telling you what you need to do step by step by step to reach enlightenment. So after that, various other masters wrote similar types of texts on of this type, the Lamrim. And one of the greatest of these was written by Lama Tsongkhapa, called the Lamrim Chenmo, the Great Exposition of the Stages of the Path. And this is translated into English. You can see it up there on the bookshelf. It's 3-volume. It's a 3-volume, so it's quite a great work. And Lama Tsongkhapa also wrote other texts on the Lamrim of varying lengths. There's one called the Middle Length Lamrim, which is actually one of the topics studied in the basic program, which we'll do one of these days. And then this one, the 3 principal aspects of the path, is a very short version of the Lamrim. So it's like a very condensed version of the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment. So it's just by learning this text, you get kind of an overview of the path to enlightenment. Now, I just want to mention here that the Lamrim texts are really not for beginners. They're really not for people who are new to Buddhism. And you can understand that by looking at the order of the topics and the way that they're explained and so on. So they're really designed for people who are already Buddhists, people who already know about the Buddhist teachings and accept the Buddhist teachings. So they accept things like karma and reincarnation and the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and so on. So they kind of already know all of these things and accept all of these things, and they just want to get down to practicing. Okay, now I want to do it. I want to get to enlightenment. So tell me what to do. So they're really designed for that kind of person. And it seems to me that when Tibetan Lamas started to teach Western people, like in the 50s, 60s, maybe 60s and 70s, that's when Westerners started making contact with Tibetan Lamas and getting interested and saying, we want to learn about Buddhism, tell us about Buddhism. I think that the Tibetans didn't actually have texts meant for non-Buddhists, because in Tibet, everybody was a Buddhist. Well, not everybody, but probably 99%. People were born into Buddhist families. They were raised in a Buddhist environment. So they already kind of were Buddhist from birth. So there really wasn't a need for books to explain Buddhism to non-Buddhists. So I think they didn't really have books like that. So they thought, oh, well, the Lamrim, that will be a good thing for to teach them, because it kind of tells the main points that you need to follow to reach enlightenment. But I'm just saying this because the way the Lamrim texts are written and so on, it's as if it kind of assumes you already believe all of these things. You already know these things and believe them, and it's just assuming that. So those of us, if any of you are, are kind of new to Buddhism, or even if you have been learning Buddhism for a while, but still not quite sure if this is the path that you want to follow, then when we go through this text, you need to do so try to have an open mind, not just rejecting things that might be difficult to accept. So try to keep an open mind, but a skeptical mind at the same time, like checking to see, is this true or not? So the Buddha himself said that, when he was teaching, he said to his followers, don't just believe what I say, check it out for yourself, investigate it, analyze it, determine for yourself if it's true or not. And there's this analogy, you say, like a person who's a goldsmith who works with gold, makes jewelry out of gold and so forth. So if somebody tries to sell this person some material that looks like gold, there are things that look like gold but are not gold. So the goldsmith has ways of testing this material to see if it's genuine gold or if it's fake. So they say we should do the same when it comes to not just Buddhist teachings, but any spiritual teachings. We should always investigate them carefully, really think about them, analyze them, check them out, test them to see if they're true or not, if they're beneficial or not, if they're right for us or not. So try to keep that in mind, and check to see if these ideas that are presented here in this text are helpful for you or not. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to use this book as the basis for going through the text, because he's, Geshe mentioned, gave this very nice explanation of the text. So in the first part of the book, page 9, he gives an introduction, and he begins by talking about motivation. So this is a topic that I think all Tibetan Lamas in all traditions, they talk about this, how important it is that we have, or we try to have, a positive motivation for doing the things that we do, especially when it comes to spiritual activities such as meditation or studying spiritual teachings, or doing good things for others, helping others and so forth. So we should always try to make sure we have a good motivation for these things. And he starts off talking about this topic of the precious human life. That, so it's said that in the Buddhist teachings, going back to the Buddha, it said that we're actually really, really fortunate that we have a human life with certain qualities, certain conditions, certain circumstances. Because there's actually a lot of living beings um, in this world, but also in the universe. Buddhism talks about different worlds besides this one where there are sentient beings. And so there's different kinds of sentient beings, and they have different kinds of lives and different kinds of experiences. But it said that of all the different types of beings there are, being born as a human being, having a human body, a human life is particularly what is the word? Conducive for spiritual practice. It's like the best kind of life that one could have to be able to follow the path to enlightenment. So Buddhism says that all living beings, even animals and insects, any living being that has a mind, consciousness, has the potential to become enlightened. So it's actually a quality of the mind, anyone's mind. There's this basic quality that can be transformed, and that mind can become enlightened mind. So the potential for enlightenment exists in every living being, every sentient being, every being who has a mind. However, not all the sentient beings are in the most ideal circumstances to be able to recognize that they have this potential for enlightenment and then be able to develop it. So some living beings, for example, their intelligence is such that they're just not able to understand that there's such a thing as enlightenment and that they have the potential to reach enlightenment. So if you tried to explain to an animal, for example, your pet dog or cat or bird or whatever, you try to explain to them about enlightenment and, oh, you have the potential to reach enlightenment. Do you think they will be able to understand what you're talking about? You can try, but they might not understand. um, and um, and then when it comes to actually practicing, doing the things that we have to do to develop our potential for enlightenment, like we have to practice meditation, we have to learn concentration, we have to develop wisdom and so forth. So these various things that we need to do with our mind to bring about this transformation and bring our mind to enlightenment. So to be able to do those things, again, requires a certain type of mind, a certain level of intelligence. So not all living beings would be capable of that. Not all human beings would be capable of that. So the idea of the precious human life, or sometimes it's called the perfect human rebirth, is if you were born as a human being, you have a human body, a human mind, and you have other conditions as well, some of them external, some of them internal, that give you the most ideal situation in which you can recognize that you have the potential for enlightenment and are interested. You actually have to be interested in this, and then have access to teachers and teachings that will help you to cultivate, to make manifest this potential that we have. So that's the meaning, just in brief, of a precious human rebirth. So it isn't just any human life, but it's a human life that has those conditions. And the Buddha himself spoke about this in one of the sutras. He was with some of his disciples one day, and he said, imagine if the whole world was covered with water, one huge ocean. And then there's a tortoise or turtle, I don't know which one, living in this ocean. And most of the time, this tortoise is down at the bottom of the ocean. But once in 100 years, it has the chance to come up and stick its head above the water. And just for a short time, and then it has to go back down and stay on the bottom of the ocean. And another thing is the tortoise is blind. can't see. Now, on the surface of this ocean, there's a golden yolk, like a lifesaver. You know that? They have on ships. So it's a ring with a hole in the middle. And this is floating around on the surface of the ocean. So it's always in different places. It's not in the same place all the time. So the wind and the waves, the tide, move it around. Okay, so now when this once in 100 years, this tortoise comes to the surface of the ocean and sticks its head above the water, how likely is it that it will stick its head through the circle in the golden ring? Remember, the tortoise is blind. This yolk is moving around all the time, never in the same place, and it's a huge ocean, as big as the whole world. So, how likely is it that the tortoise is going to stick its head above the water, through the hole of the ring? So the disciple says, not very likely. And the Buddha said, yeah, right. And in the same way, um, it's not very often. It's actually very, very rare that one is born as a human being and that one has the opportunity to meet with the teachings that show the path to enlightenment. So now you have both of these circumstances, so make good use of it. Don't waste your time. So it's said that it's actually very rare to have all the conditions, both inner conditions, having the human life with intelligence and so forth, and the outer conditions, being able to meet with teachings that show the path to enlightenment. And so this is actually very rare, uh, relative to the world, relative to the universe, relative to the situation that most living beings find themselves in. So it's actually very rare to have this type of life, which is called the precious human life. So if we think about this and recognize that we have this situation, then the idea is that we should really make good use of it, make good use of our life while we have it, because it's not going to last forever. So I thought maybe we could just for a short time before the break, let's do a little bit of meditation on this to see how we are able, whether we are able to relate to it or not, whether we are able to accept this idea and if it's useful for us. So just close your eyes and calm down your mind. If there are thoughts not related to what we are talking about, then put those aside for now and see if you can just keep your mind focused on this topic that we're talking about. Now start by asking yourself this question: how do I feel about my life? Do I feel fortunate to have the life that I do? Do I feel that I have a fortunate life? Ask yourself if you ever feel the wish to have a different kind of life than the one that you have. Like, for example, do you ever wish to change lives with somebody else? If do you ever feel like you wish you could be somebody else than who you are? And if you find that you do sometimes feel the wish to be somebody else, to change lives with somebody else, then why is that? What's the reason for that? And finally, if someone asks you, what's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? What would you say in response? So you may not have felt you had enough time to answer those questions, but I think they're important questions, and you could spend time later on your own thinking about them and coming up with answers to them. It's funny, sometimes people ask me this question about the purpose of life. They say, what's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? And I usually say that it's up to you. This is an individual thing. I don't think it's the case that there is one absolute purpose of life or meaning of life that everybody has to conform to, that everybody has to accept and say, oh, yes, that's the purpose of life. I think it's more up to each person to think about this, to explore different possibilities, and then decide for themselves what they want to make as the meaning or the purpose of life. I don't think it's something that other people can tell us. I don't think it would be right to be told this is the purpose of your life and this is what you should do with your life. I think it's for each person to explore that and then decide for themselves. But having said that, um, different religions and spiritual traditions and philosophers do offer possible, answers to that question. So Buddhism does offer answers. In fact, several answers um, that we could think about. And if we're comfortable with them, we could make them our own. We could adopt them. So, for example, using our life to follow the spiritual path and work towards liberation and enlightenment, these higher states of mind, um, for the benefit of ourselves, for the benefit of others. So that's one possible reason or purpose for living and doing what we do with our life. Um, or a simpler one would be just making your life beneficial for others, using your life to do things that are helpful for others as much as you can and not harming others. So this is what the Dalai Lama sometimes says. Um, Try to help others as much as you can. And if you can't help them, at least try not to harm them. So that's kind of a nice, simple little formula about how to live your life. So if you contemplate these ideas and they make sense to you and you feel right, you feel, yeah, that feels good, that feels right, then you could make that your own. But this is something that needs to come from you, from your side, from your heart, based on having thought about and um, investigated and then, decided, yeah, that that feels right for me. That feels good for me. I want to do that, rather than just be doing it because somebody else suggested it. Does that make sense? So I'm bringing this up now because on the first page of the text, the Lama Geshe Sonam Rinchen talks about this, about the human life that we have, um, because having this human life, we can do many things, and many things we can do with our life. We have lots of possibilities, but he's saying it's best if we could try to at least put it to good use and not harm others. And from the Buddhist point of view, the best way of using our life is to follow the spiritual path. But that's something we have to check for ourselves, decide for ourselves if that feels right. If that's what we do want to do. So, with regard to this idea of motivation, um, maybe it's best if we have a little break now. Let's stop and have a break now, and then I'll talk about motivation afterwards. So let's have 10-minute break. I think there's Okay, so we were talking about motivation and what is sort of advised or recommended in the Buddhist tradition is to, if possible, if it's comfortable for us, to have a motivation of wanting to benefit others as much as we can, or if you're able to accept the ideas of enlightenment, the possibility of attaining enlightenment, or the possibility of attaining nirvana, liberation, being free of all suffering and causes of suffering. So, uh, trying to make that your motivation for meditation, study, and the other things that you do in your life, then it said that the actions that we do will become really meaningful and beneficial, and will actually help us get to that state. So you say, even for ordinary things like drinking a cup of tea or eating a meal, if you think, oh, may this give me energy so that I can continue in my path, my practice, and eventually reach enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, and even those simple actions will become causes for us to attain enlightenment. They will bring us closer to enlightenment. But of course, with more spiritual activities like meditating, studying, helping others, and so forth, then if we do those actions with the motivation of altruism, bodhicitta, then those actions will actually be, go towards our attainment of enlightenment, help us get closer to enlightenment. So it's recommended that we try to have a good motivation, a positive motivation for all the things that we do. And there's just to read a quotation from the Dalai Lama. He says, when I talk about the practice of the Dharma, I do not mean leaving everything behind and going into solitary retreat. I simply mean that we should integrate a higher level of awareness into our daily lives. Whether we are eating or sleeping or doing business, we should constantly check our intentions, check our body, speech, and mind, for even the subtlest negativity. Try to bring your day-to-day activities into line with a compassionate motivation. So try to be aware if there's some negative, harmful or selfish or greedy motivation there. And if there is, you can replace it with one that's more compassionate, more altruistic. Infuse your acts of body, speech, and mind with the wisdom gained from hearing the teachings and from practice. So again, this is one of the reasons for learning the Dharma, because by learning the Dharma, studying the Dharma, contemplating the Dharma, that helps us to become more aware of our mind and our motivation and what we're doing, and helps us to kind of straighten out things that may not be going so well. try to make our activities more beneficial and bringing us closer to enlightenment. So then the next in the introduction, Geshe Sona Rinchen talks about the ideal state of mind to have when listening to teachings. So this is talked about in the longer, more extensive versions of the Lam Rim. And so one point is there are three possible states of mind that we might have while we're listening to teachings that are unhelpful or faulty, and we should try to avoid these. So these are explained using the analogy of a vessel. Vessel could be a pot or bowl or even a cup. So one unhelpful state of mind is said to be being like a vessel that's upside down. So a vessel is something in which you can put things, like if you want to drink a cup of coffee or tea, then you want it to be right side up so that the coffee or tea actually goes inside and doesn't spill all over the place. So in a similar way, our state of mind could be upside down rather than right side up. And that means being distracted. If our mind, we might be sitting there while teachings are being given, but if we're thinking about other things, our mind is busy, you know, making, I don't know, plans for later on, or thinking about things that happened earlier on or yesterday or whatever. So our mind is totally preoccupied with other things, and we're not really paying attention to what is being said. So that state of mind is said to be like an upside down vessel. Nothing goes in. Our mind is like shut, closed, and unable to take in anything. So we should try to avoid that. Try to listen with a concentrated mind. Then the second unhelpful state of mind is said to be like a vessel that's dirty. So if you want to drink a cup of coffee or tea, but the cup you have is dirty, you know, it's all full of yucky stuff, then whatever goes inside will become dirty as well, not fit to drink. So a state of mind that's like that would be a state of mind that is kind of polluted with unhelpful attitudes, like being critical. I mean, even though we're told that we should investigate and analyze, you know, and check what we hear and not just immediately believe it, but sometimes we might be critical in ways that are not helpful, like sometimes critical of the teacher. You can think, oh, this teacher is really stupid. He doesn't know anything. She doesn't know anything. Look at how she's dressed. He looks really awful. So our mind could be focused on things like that. And so with a state of mind like that, then the teachings that we hear may not be beneficial, because we may feel sort of superior, arrogant, proud, and then that also kind of makes us close to what that person is saying. So this kind of thing can happen, does happen, and we need to, you know, be on the lookout for attitudes that might make our mind somewhat polluted, so that whatever information comes in could also become polluted. Another example of this is if we have wrong motivations. Like the real purpose of learning the Dharma is to transform our mind, to benefit our mind, to bring our mind to higher states like liberation and enlightenment, free our mind from um, disturbing attitudes, delusions, and so forth. But sometimes people can have deluded attitudes for listening to the teachings. Like, for example, sometimes people might want to learn, and I've met people like this, so I know what happens. People are interested in learning about meditation and learning about Buddhism because they want to make business out of it. You know, they want to, you know, become a teacher and charge a lot of money, make a lot of money, and then, you know, have wealth that they can use for themselves and so on. And that's not the right attitude to have. Dharma shouldn't be used for business, for self-gain, for ego. So ideally, that's why it said, you know, the ideal motivation is altruism, listening to teachings with the wish to benefit others, to help others as much as we can, rather than just thinking about what we ourselves can get out of it, especially if it's just material things like money, money or fame. Okay, then the third unhelpful state of mind is said to be like a vessel that's leaky, that has a crack in it or a hole in the bottom. So if the cup, you know, might be right side up and it might be clean, but if it has a big crack in the bottom, then whatever you pour in will just go right out. You won't be able to retain it. And so having a state of mind like that is if we have this expression in English, going in one ear and out the other. Yeah, it's like you okay, so you hear teachings, and while you're sitting there, you think, wow, this is great. I really enjoy that. But then afterwards, you can't remember anything. You've totally forgotten what was said. So they say we should really try to remember what we've learned. And if we have difficulty remembering, then we can take notes, or like here we have material, books and outlines and so forth to help us remember. So we should ideally try to retain what we've learned, even if we can't retain everything, but at least the most important points, the points that are going to be helpful for us. Try to keep those in mind and use them in your life. So those are 3 states of mind we should try to avoid: and a distracted mind, a polluted mind, and a leaky mind. Mind that just forgets everything right away. And then it's also mentioned 6 helpful attitudes to have for learning and listening to the teachings. And the first of these is to think of oneself as being like someone who is suffering from illness, who has illness, who's sick, in other words, which is true from the point of view of Buddhism, because even if we're physically healthy, we may not have any physical health problems, but in terms of our mental state, we do have a lot of unhealthy attitudes in our mind, like anger and hatred, irritation, selfishness, greed, and so forth. So, and basically ignorance, not knowing the true nature of things. So our mind is not in the healthiest state it could be. So we are somewhat like a person who's suffering from illness. And when we're sick, we naturally want to go and see a doctor and get medicine, get a cure, get treatment to help us get back to a state of health. So, in this analogy, then, the second attitude is that the Buddha, or our teacher, spiritual teacher from whom we're learning the teachings, is like a doctor, someone we go to seek help for these problems that we are having. And then the third attitude is the Dharma is like is like medicine. So the actual medicine that enables us to be cured, recover from these inner mental, psychological problems that we have is the Dharma, the teachings. Because the teachings show us how to transform our mind, how to free our mind from the disturbing attitudes, from ignorance and hatred and greed and so forth, and how to develop the positive qualities that we already have in our mind, but can be developed further: love and compassion and wisdom and patience and generosity and so forth. So the Dharma shows us how to do that. And so that's like the medicine that will cure our problems, our suffering. And then the fourth attitude is that practicing the Dharma is the way to become cured. So Dharma is not something that we should just listen to and learn about, but then put it up on the shelf and never do anything with it. So that would be like if you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you medicine, but you just put it in a drawer, you put it on the shelf, and you never take it. It's not going to do you much good. So the Dharma is meant to be taken, to be applied to our life, to be used in our life, to be practiced in our life, to whatever extent we can. I mean, everyone is different. So some people might be able to practice a lot. If they have more time and more energy and more ability, they might be able to practice a lot. But others may not be able to practice so much. But even if you can practice just a little bit, like if we learn about loving kindness and compassion, then trying to apply that more in our life with people around us, with ourselves as well. Learning to be more kind to ourselves, learning to be more kind to the people around us, and so on. So I think there's always something that people can practice, even if they're very busy, even if they haven't been able to study a lot. But even in little ways, there are things one can do to bring the Dharma into our life, and in that way start to become more healthy, to cure our suffering. The fifth attitude is to have respect for enlightened beings, to see enlightened beings, Buddhas, as uh, people we can trust, people we can rely on, and have respect and trust and confidence in them. And then the sixth attitude is having the wish for the Dharma to remain in the world as much as possible and not disappear, and to reach as many people and beings as possible. And if there are ways we can do that in our own life, not in a pushy way, you know. Buddhism isn't like a proselytizing religion where you are supposed to go out and knock on people's doors and hand out books on the street and so forth. that's not uh, that's not the Buddhist way. But if and when people are interested, if they show interest in learning the Dharma, then it's good to share it with them, to help them to learn the Dharma as well. So, these are, we're advised to try to have these 6 attitudes. Some of them you may, or all of them, you may not feel right about. You may not feel you're ready to or able to adapt them in your life. Because, as I mentioned before, the Lamrim teachings are really meant for people who are already Buddhist, who have already studied and thought about and come to the conclusion that this is what they want to do with their life. They want to follow this path. So if you're still new to Buddhism and you're not yet sure if the Dharma is as valuable as it's explained to be in the text, then you don't have to adapt all these attitudes. But it said that if we can adapt these attitudes, then it's going to be very helpful for us. Okay, then Geshe Suna gives a biography of Tsongkhapa. So I'll just mention some of the main points of that. So again, Tsongkhapa is the author of this text, and he was born in 1357. How many years ago is that? 700 years. And there were various miraculous events that took place at the time that he was born, and this attracted the attention of a great Lama who was living in that area. And so he took an interest in this young child and asked the family if he could be the teacher of the child. So when Lama Tsongkhapa was 7 years old, he went to study with this master. And so he began learning Buddhism. And of course, he had to start with reading and writing and so on. And then started to study Buddhist texts. And he became a monk when he was 8 years old and was given the name Losang Drakpa. So Lama Tsongkhapa's actual name is Losang Drakpa. The name Tsongkhapa actually means the man from Tsong. Tsong is the area where he came from. So they do that sometimes, the Tibetans. They name a person after the area where they came from. And then later, when he was 16, he was born in the northeastern part of Tibet called Amdo, which is also where the Dalai Lama comes from. And so when he was 16, he went to central Tibet and began studying with some of the great masters, teachers in that area. And it said he studied with over 50 prominent teachers of different traditions, Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu. And he became an accomplished scholar of the Buddhist texts, both Sutra and Tantra. And one of his teachers was kind of a special person, a visionary, you might say. His name was Lama Umapa. And this Lama had direct visions of and communication with Manjushri. Manjushri is the Buddha of wisdom. So the tanka here on the wall on the left of the Buddha, this gold figure holding a sword, is Manjushri. So Manjushri is the Buddha of wisdom. So this Lama Umapa, this is apparently a common thing in Tibet, that certain people, especially those who'd been meditating a lot and who had very, very pure minds, they would actually have visions of Buddhas and would be able to talk with them and get teachings from them. And so that was the case with this Lama Umapa. And so through his connection with Lama Umapa, Lama Tsongkhapa also started to have a connection with Manjushri and would ask questions and get answers and so forth. And then later he himself began to have these visions of Manjushri and was able to just say, just like, we see each other and talk to each other. Lama Tsongkhapa would have this kind of experience with Manjushri. So he was able to get direct teachings from Manjushri. And when Lama Tsongkhapa was about 35 years old, Manjushri advised him to go into retreat. And so he, together with some of his friends, went to a very isolated part of Tibet and began doing very serious practices. First, they did preliminary practices, like I was talking about earlier with the 7-limb prayer, practices for purification and accumulation of merit, like doing prostrations, mandala offerings, and so on. So they did lots and lots and lots of those practices. And they were also studying and meditating and so forth. And then after about 6 years of being in this situation of retreat, one night Lama Tsongkhapa had a dream. And in his dream, he saw many of these great Indian masters who were sitting around and talking about Madhyamika philosophy, the teachings on emptiness. And one of these great masters, whose name was Buddha Palita, so he was one of the great Indian masters in the Madhyamika tradition, came towards Lama Tsongkhapa and put a text on his head, like to bless him with this text. And that very text was a text that Lama Tsongkhapa had been reading, just the day before. And so when he woke up, after this dream, he went and looked at this text and started reading it again. And he got this realization of emptiness. So it happened in his mind, the realization of emptiness. So that was a very important point in his life. Then after that, for the rest of his life, he engaged in teaching. He also wrote many texts, and he did other kinds of activities to help support the Dharma in Tibet. And he passed away in 1419 at the age of 62. And so Lama Tsongkhapa is said to be the founder of this tradition, Gelug tradition. So he made some changes in the way teachings were given and things were explained. And also he put a lot of emphasis on ethics and Vinaya. So I think some practitioners had become a bit slack about that. So he said it's really, really important to live ethically, have pure ethics, and so on. So that's actually the meaning of Gelug. Ge is the word for virtue, and Luk is tradition. So it's the tradition of virtue. Not that the other traditions aren't virtuous, but this is like a special emphasis in the Gelug tradition, the importance of living ethically, keeping good ethics. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the author of the text. And then on page 17, Geshe-la talks about the importance of the 3 principal aspects of the path. So what are the 3 principal aspects of the path? Do any of you know?
Renunciation.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So the path to enlightenment, the whole path to enlightenment actually consists of many things to learn, to study, to meditate on, to practice, and so forth. But out of all of those things, it said that there are 3 that are really, really important, like the 3 most important ones. and they are these three. The first one, it's usually called renunciation. However, that term can make some people feel uncomfortable because it can sound like you have to live a very strict ascetic life. You have to renounce the world. You have to renounce happiness and so forth. So some people aren't too comfortable with that word. And in fact, it's not really a good translation of the Tibetan term. The Tibetan term for this, I don't know the Sanskrit term, but the Tibetan term for this particular aspect is Ngejung. And Nge means certain or definite, and Jung means to arise or to emerge. So some translators, teachers and translators prefer to use the term definite emergence, which probably doesn't make much sense to you, but the idea is um, one wants to definitely, certainly emerge from or arise from our ordinary unenlightened existence, what we usually call samsara. So samsara is the term for the situation that we are in where we are not enlightened, we haven't reached nirvana, our mind is still very much caught up in ignorance, not seeing the true nature of things, and other kinds of disturbing emotions, anger and hatred and greed, selfishness, jealousy, pride, and so forth. So our mind is kind of afflicted with various mental states that are unhealthy and are the cause of suffering. Yeah, they're actually the cause of suffering for ourselves, and they can also be the cause of suffering for other people. For example, when we get angry and get all caught up in anger, then the way we talk, the way we act can be harmful for other people. So they are disturbing not only for ourselves, but also for others. So these states of mind are considered unhealthy or unwise or unskillful. And so, as long as we are in this situation where we're not free from these unhealthy states of mind, then this is what we call samsara. Um, so, the idea of renunciation, or let's not call it that, but determination to be free, or indefinite emergence, or in this book, the translator here is using the term the wish for freedom. Wish for freedom. So that's a nice term. Yeah. So it's the wish to become free from this situation of samsara, of being unenlightened and being uh, caught up in unhealthy states of mind, experiencing problems and suffering and so forth. So realizing that the situation that we are in is not satisfactory, is not pleasant, is actually painful, and then wanting to be free from this, wishing to be free from this. So that's the actual meaning of this first aspect of the path. Does that make sense? So, yeah, I think either the wish for freedom or definite emergence, those are more appropriate terms for this state of mind. Renunciation is okay. It's often used. So if you like that, it's okay to use that. But like I say, some people are a little put off by the term renunciation. So that's the first of the three principal aspects of the path. And then the second is bodhicitta, which is a Sanskrit term. It means the mind of enlightenment. And this is when one feels such strong love and compassion for others, sentient beings, beings who, like ourselves, are in this situation of being unenlightened and experiencing suffering and problems. So what you do with this second aspect of the path is you actually extend the same attitude you developed in the first one, the wish to be free. Okay, you extend that to everyone else. You think, okay, just like myself, all these other people, all these other beings are in this unenlightened situation. They're suffering, they have problems, and I want them to be free too. I want them to be free as well as myself. I want to help them to get out. So it's a bit like if you find yourself in a burning building, building's on fire and everybody wants to get out. So of course you want to get yourself out of this situation, but if you have enough, awareness that there are other people in this building as well who also want to get out, then you might try to help them to get out as well. So that's the second attitude, is bodhicitta. It's feeling the wish for all other people and beings to also become free of unenlightened existence, samsara. And wanting to help them, you realize, well, I have to help myself first. I have to get myself out of this situation. I have to free myself from these disturbing states of mind, because as long as I'm still caught up in them, my ability to help others will be limited. If I still have greed, hatred, ignorance, and so on, that will limit my ability to help others. So if I can free myself from those states of mind and develop my potential, my good qualities, develop those, then my ability to help others will increase more and more and more and more and more. I'll be able to help others much, much better and much more. So that's basically bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is thinking, I want to help others to get free of suffering, and to help others, I need to develop my potential for enlightenment. I need to become an enlightened being, a Buddha, so that I can help others. So that's your goal, your aspiration. And then the third of the three is, the actual official term for this is correct view, or right view. And this refers to emptiness, which means the true nature of things. The term emptiness refers to the actual way in which everything exists, which is there. It's already there around us all the time, but we don't see it. And the reason we don't see it is because our mind is, it's as, I think of it as like there's a veil over our mind that's causing us to see things in a distorted way, in a mistaken way, in a way other than how they actually are. And so because of this, because our mind is seeing things in a distorted way, not in a correct way, that is actually why and how we get caught up in all of these disturbing emotions, like anger, hatred, jealousy, greed, selfishness, pride, and so forth. So all of those are actually based on ignorance, not seeing the true nature of things. And it said that when we are able to remove this veil and see things as they really are, then these disturbing emotions just, they have nothing to stand on anymore. They don't immediately go away, but slowly they decrease, and eventually they become non-existent. They just don't arise anymore. So the understanding of emptiness, the true nature of things, is crucial to become free of suffering, to become free of these disturbing attitudes, to become free of samsara, to attain nirvana, to attain enlightenment. So, okay, so that's just a brief explanation of these three principal aspects of the path that are this is the subject matter of this text. So as we go through the text, we'll go through these one by one. There's a few verses of the text that are dealing with each of these one by one. Now, okay, so we don't have time to go through every word of this book, but if you're interested, you can read it on your own. So now I'm going to go to page 25. So here, Geshe-la is starting to teach the actual text, starting with the first line of the text. So the first line of the text says, homage to the venerable and holy teachers. So this is a tradition in when Buddhist authors compose a text. They always start with homage, paying homage to somebody or something. So it could be homage to the Buddha or homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Sometimes they may pay homage to a particular quality like compassion or wisdom. So they can choose for themselves who they want to pay homage to. And the reason for doing this is partly an act of humility, like showing respect to someone or something that's higher and greater than oneself. And also another reason is to make things auspicious, because they're just starting to write the text and they want to be able to finish the text. So by paying homage to some holy and venerable object, then that will make things more conducive to be able to finish writing the text, something like that. So in this case, Lama Tsongkhapa chooses to pay homage to the holy and venerable and holy teachers. So Geshe Sonam Rinchen said when Lama Tsongkhapa does this, he might be thinking of his own teachers. He had many teachers in his life from whom he learned the Dharma. And so he may be thinking of his own teachers, but he also might be thinking of all the lineage teachers that have gone back in time to the Buddha. So there are many teachers, starting with the Buddha and then over the generations from the Buddha's time until the present time, many teachers who have learned the teachings, studied them, meditated on them, practiced them, gained realizations of them, and then became teachers, passing on these teachings to their disciples. So in that way, the Buddha's teachings have been kept alive for, I think it's 2,600 years now. So it's a long time. So just showing a gratitude and appreciation to all of those teachers who have kept the teachings alive up until the present, so that one is able to receive these teachings. So then, so then Geshe-la goes on to talk about this topic, which isn't really explained very much in this little text, the three principal aspects of the path, but in larger Lamrim texts like the Lamrim Chenmo or Liberation in the Palm of the Hand by Pabonka Rinpoche, then it's explained very extensively. It's a topic that sometimes it's called guru devotion, but a better term, a better translation is reliance on the spiritual teacher. Reliance on the spiritual teacher. So this topic usually comes kind of at the beginning of Lamrim texts. And that is another indication that Lamrim texts are really not for beginners because it's just not appropriate. Like a brand new person walking in the door and wanting to learn about Buddhism, and the first thing you tell them is, well, you have to have devotion to spiritual teachers. So that's not the right place to start. First, a person needs to learn what Buddhism is all about. And after some time, then they may feel ready to, okay, yeah, I want to get into this more. I want to study more and practice more. So what do I need to do? So at that point, then it's appropriate to talk about the relationship with spiritual teachers, how to have the most healthy and conducive relationship with spiritual teachers. So normally when we're teaching the Dharma, we don't teach this subject right in the beginning. We leave it until later. But because it's a Lamrim text, and Lamrim texts are for people who are ready to start following the path, then that topic usually comes up in the beginning. So I'm going to of the main points as Geshe-la goes through it. And it's useful to know about this topic, even if you're not ready yet to, engage in a relationship with a spiritual teacher. It's still helpful to learn, what that involves, so that if sometime in the future you do want to start practicing it, you'll know how to do so. So just to mention some of the main points, on the bottom of page 26, Geshe-la says that he thinks Tsongkhapa chooses to pay homage to spiritual teachers because without them, we can develop neither great nor small insights, but with their help, we can first develop and then strengthen and enhance the three principal realizations discussed here. So it is said that in order, because Dharma, we're talking about Dharma, learning Buddhism, learning the path to enlightenment. And the whole purpose of this is to bring about a transformation of our mind, to generate insights, realizations, transformations in our mind. And it's said that for that to happen, for that to actually happen, we need a spiritual teacher. We need more than one spiritual teacher. And we also need to have a healthy relationship with spiritual teachers. So strictly speaking, I mean, some people, like Western people, sometimes they think, well, I don't really need a teacher. I can just read books, or there's plenty of material on the internet. You know, I can get all this material. I can learn all about Buddhism and how to meditate on, you know, from these other sources. I don't need a teacher. So, I mean, it's true to a certain extent. You can learn a lot on your own, just studying on your own. But there's something about a teacher. Now, a teacher here is talking about a real teacher, a teacher who we'll go through later what are the qualities of a teacher. It's not just an ordinary person, but someone who's really learned a lot and integrated what they've learned into their life, so that they actually have transformed themselves, at least to a certain extent, through the Dharma that they've learned. They've developed compassion and love and wisdom and patience and these kind of positive qualities. So they actually embody those qualities. And when you meet such teachers, I don't know if you've had the chance to meet lamas or even attend teachings by the Dalai Lama or see, you know, videos or YouTube, you know, whatever videos of the Dalai Lama, then you might get a sense of this. You know, it's quite an extraordinary thing to actually meet a person, a human being like ourselves, but who has really gone a long way in their spiritual practice and spiritual development. And they're really, like I say, embodying the qualities that are talked about in the teachings. So it becomes like a living, breathing, live presence of these qualities. So it's quite a different thing when you meet someone like that, to get a sense of what compassion is, for example. I mean, you can learn about compassion, you can read books about compassion, you can develop an understanding of compassion intellectually, but it's quite a different thing to actually meet someone who is living compassion, who is really doing it in their life. So, so I think that's the reason why it's said that having teachers is so important. You know, to really show a living, breathing, three-dimensional, live uh, manifestation of the kinds of qualities that are talked about in the teachings. It adds a different dimension to your understanding of Dharma than what you would get just by reading books or, you know, getting information from the internet and so on. And so they say it's very important to have such teachers and to have a healthy relationship with such teachers, in order that our own mind will be able to generate the same insights and qualities and go through the same kind of transformation as the teachers. Yeah, and another point that they often make on the top of page 27, even to learn ordinary things, you know, like how to cook, how to drive a car, how to use a computer. You know, it's most effective to learn that from somebody else, from somebody who has that knowledge, who has expertise, experience, and so forth, to get really good at it. You know, like being a chef, for example. I think if you just read cookbooks, yeah, and downloaded recipes from the internet, and you kind of taught yourself how to cook, I doubt very much that you'd be hired in a restaurant, that they would hire you as a cook, right? Yeah, they want to make sure you went to a cooking school and you studied under a proper chef, and you had some experience in cooking before you're going to get hired as a cook. So even for ordinary things like that, we need teachers to show us how to do things. So then when it comes to the spiritual path, which is much more subtle, much more difficult than something like cooking or driving or using a computer, because it has to do with our mind. It has to do with this inner state that we have, our mind, our consciousness. So that's much more difficult to learn about that and practice that. So all the more reason that we need spiritual teachers to help us with that. But then we shouldn't just choose anybody to be a spiritual teacher. Especially, well, I think it's probably always been the case, but nowadays there's a lot of people who claim to be spiritual teachers, and they even claim that they have realizations, that they have visions, that they have this and that, and we can't just believe what people say. We have to investigate carefully and check to see if that person is a proper teacher, a qualified teacher. And so there's certain qualities that we should look for. So on page 27, there's a verse there that mentions 10 qualities that one should look for in a spiritual teacher if you want to follow the Mahayana path. So this is in the Mahayana tradition. So if you want to follow the path to enlightenment and become an enlightened being, then ideally you find a teacher who has these 10 qualities. So the 10 qualities are being subdued, and this is said to come from the practice of ethics. So ideally you find a teacher who has good ethics, who's, if they have taken vows, they're keeping their vows properly, and their behavior, their way of behaving and so on is subdued, ethical. And then the second quality is calm. And calm actually means that they have good concentration, that they have been practicing concentration and have developed the ability to keep their mind concentrated. Ideally, they've actually achieved calm abiding, but even if they haven't achieved that, at least they have, pretty good control over their mind and be able to have good concentration. And then the very peaceful, the third quality, it refers to a state of mind that is very much peaceful and subdued as a result of wisdom, as a result of studying and meditating on wisdom, so that they have a good understanding of the true nature of things. And as a result of that, their mind is very, very subdued, rather than just being totally caught up in disturbing emotions. And then the next quality is surpassing qualities. So what that means is that the teacher ideally should have more qualities than you, more knowledge, more qualities than you. Should be better than you, not worse than you. And then the next quality is perseverance. So this means that ideally, you shouldn't have a teacher who's lazy, but one who's has a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy to do positive things, to study Dharma and practice Dharma and teach Dharma and so forth. So a lot of spiritual energy. And then rich in learning. So ideally you find a teacher who has studied a lot, who has a lot of knowledge of Buddhist teachings, Buddhist scriptures. So if the teacher only knows a little bit, then that will limit how much they can teach you and help you. And then the next quality is understanding of suchness. So suchness is another term for emptiness. So it said ideally, the ideal thing would be to find a teacher who's actually realized emptiness, who has a first-hand realization of emptiness. But that's not always easy to find, but at least a good understanding, a good grasp of the topic of emptiness. And then skilled in communication, the next quality. So that means when it comes to teaching, they're good at it. They're able to explain things in a way that helps the students to understand. So you might have a teacher who has a lot of knowledge and a lot of realization, but when it comes to talking and speaking, they may not be very skilled. So then it's difficult they learn to others. The next quality is compassionate. So this means that ideally the teacher is teaching out of compassion and not out of wanting to get money or wanting to get fame or something for themselves, but they really care about their students and really try to help their students. So that is the motivation they have for teaching. And then undiscouraged means that it's, the teacher should ideally have patience and be willing, even if it's necessary, to repeat the same thing many times. Like some students might be very quick and pick things up quickly, but others are slow and you have to say the same thing many, many, many times. So then, not being discouraged by that, but continuing to, to teach. There was one story of my teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and he said one time he was staying up in the mountains in the Himalayas in Nepal, where he comes from, and there was this man, this local man, who had done some bad thing and wanted to purify it. So he came to Rinpoche and confessed, and he said, "I'm really sorry that I did this, and I wish to purify it." And Rinpoche advised him to recite the Vajrasattva mantra. This is a mantra it's particularly good for purification, but it's very long. It's like 100 syllables or more. And this man was illiterate. He didn't know how to read. So Rinpoche had to teach the mantra to this man orally. So that means he had, he would say the mantra and the man would repeat it little by little. And they had to do this again and again and again before the man finally got the mantra, was able to say the mantra by himself. So I thought, wow, that's really, that's real perseverance, to be able to be willing to spend that much time with just to help one person to learn something. The last one is steadfast. So steadfast, I can't remember now what that means. I'll check and get back to you later about that. Anyway, so these are the 10 qualities that are considered most ideal to look for in a spiritual teacher. And they say if you can find a teacher that has all 10 of these qualities, that's the best. But it may be hard to do that. It may be hard to find someone who has all 10 qualities. So then they say, well, try to find one that has at least 5 of these qualities. The 5 most important ones are the first 3, subdued, calm, and very peaceful. And then understanding suchness, having an understanding of emptiness, and compassion, having a compassionate motivation. So if you can find a teacher that has those 5 qualities, then that's really good. But then it may be hard to find someone who has those 5 qualities. So then the kind of bottom line, the minimum qualities that one should look for are 3. And they are, they have more qualities than faults. So if you kind of weigh up, the qualities and the faults of this person, there's more qualities than there are faults. And the second is that they are more concerned for others than for themselves. So even if they're still kind of selfish, but they are concerned for others and, willing to help others. And then the third quality is that they are more concerned for future lives than this life. So they're more concerned for long-term things, long-term goals, than they are about short-term goals that just have to do with this present life. So those are said to be the 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 bottom line. Try to find a teacher who has those three qualities. And generally, we'll stop in a minute, but just to finish up, generally they say it's good to take time. Don't rush into this. So if you are at the point where you feel ready to look for a teacher and make a relationship, a connection with a teacher, don't rush into it, but take your time, even years. And there's stories about some of the masters of the past, like Atisha, who I mentioned earlier. And he had many, many teachers, but there was one teacher that was really important for him. And it said he spent 12 years getting to know this teacher before making the decision to take this person as a teacher, because he wanted to be really, really sure this person was a valid teacher, a qualified teacher, and someone he could commit himself to. So one of my teachers said, well, that might be too much to spend 12 years getting to know a teacher, but at least spend 2 or 3 years getting to know a teacher before making that decision that you want to commit yourself to have a relationship with that teacher. And in the meantime, of course, you can learn. You can go to teachings and learn and study with that teacher without making a commitment to them. So that's fine to do. Also, you have to decide what is it I really want to do? Do I really want to follow the path to enlightenment? So that's another important question to investigate. But if you do get to the point where you feel certain that you want to follow the path to enlightenment, then it is important to have a teacher who will guide you on that path. And it's important to find a teacher that is qualified, that does have these good qualities. Okay, so we'll stop there and have lunch break until 2 o'clock. We'll start again at 2 o'clock. And also in the afternoon, if you have questions, we'll make time for questions. So hang on to your questions if you have any now. Thank you.
Thank you.